My name is Adam Sorokin. I am the driver of the Champion Speed Shop Nostalgia Top Fuel Dragster. I've been a racer for probably over 20 years and still love it like the first day I've ever done it. I have a history in drag racing. My dad was Mike Sorokin from the Surfers Top Fuel Dragster team of the 60s. He is in the Hall of Fame, and I'm following in those footsteps. I'm originally from Santa Monica. Grew up and went to all the same schools my mother did. She went to Grant Elementary, John Adams, and Samo High, just like I did. And my dad actually went to Venice High School. My dad was a really, really good drag racer. My mom met him, ironically, through my grandmother. My mom was an exchange student in Germany and going to high school in Germany. And my grandmother, who was sometimes by herself because my grandfather was in the Air Transport Command and stuff like that back in the day, would go to the drag races with her daughter, my aunt Roxy, and she was friends with the surfers, and so they would come by, pick her up, take my grandmother, go to the drags, and my grandmother met my dad at the drag races and really liked him, and actually wrote a letter to my mom in Germany and said, "Hey, I met this really cool drag racer, blah blah blah." Nothing thought of it, and she comes back from high school and ultimately meets my dad, and they fall in love. And basically my dad was in probably about the prime of his career, and in 1966 he won the March Meet, which was and still is one of the biggest events for front engine top fuel dragsters that there is. And in 1966 it was the biggest race. There was over 100 cars entered. My dad won it, and on that night, my mom and dad's part of their, victory celebration, I'll have it, was in a little hotel in Bakersfield, and I was created. So that's the story, okay. Right? So anyway, fast forward, 9 months, I'm born, and they're married, and we're going along as a little family, and in 1967, he was driving for another car owner and was killed in a race. He was killed at Orange County Raceway, December 30th, 1967. Had a clutch come apart, which then tore the car apart, and he was thrown from the car going about 220 miles an hour and was killed instantly. Life completely changed, and my mother and I was 1 year old. She was a 18-year-old widow. We moved in with my grandparents and back in Santa Monica, and I grew up in that house with them until I was about 10 years old. And my mom, as I got older, really wanted to make sure that I knew who my father was, and so she kept every magazine that he was in, every picture, every, racing t-shirt, his helmets, all of this stuff. And she gave it to me, I think when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and so that's really kind of how I knew who my dad was. She would always tell me stories of who he was and all that kind of stuff. And, around 5, 6 years old, she would also, take me to the drag races at Orange County. And there was a Mike Sorokin Safety Foundation and a Mike Sorokin Memorial Award that they were giving by that time. And my mom had been giving it out. And when I became about 5 or 6, I started to give it out. And I would give it out to, the top fuel driver of the year, the most outstanding top fuel driver of the year. And it was a really cool award because, I would get to walk across the track and give this trophy to the best driver, and a lot of times that was a really popular driver, and that's kind of my first taste of actually meeting a real race car driver. that really resonated with me, like seeing them in their fire suits, seeing them in their helmets, getting in these cars and doing what my dad did. And, as a kid, I was really impressionable with that. And I wanted to do that too. Mm-hmm. And so my mom saw that, and she was not real in favor of me becoming too enamored with racing. And basically took me to show me what my dad did, but always kind of made sure that I knew that she didn't want me to do that. And I respected that, but I wanted to do it, and so you act that out riding your bikes down the street when you're a kid and all that kind of stuff. And so fast forward, getting back to she gives me these pictures, and I end up, when I'm 10 years old, and she gives me these pictures, and I put those on my wall, and that's how I knew who my father was. I had these 8x10 pictures, and they're in frames, and and I created these folders, and and I would know his career really well, and so he was just kind of like this hero that you don't get to talk to, and and he's gone. So that's kind of how I lived that out, and going to races every so often and seeing what he did, and still kind of wanting to do it. And when I was about 18 years old, my mom got cancer. She had stomach cancer. And she went in for an operation, and the operation they thought was for an impacted bowel or something like that, and they opened up her abdominal cavity. And basically, we're in the waiting room. Doctor comes back out, and he comes in, and we know something's wrong by the look on his face. And I'm sitting there with my Aunt Roxy. The doctor says, "I've got bad news. She has a cancer that's all throughout her abdominal cavity. Oh, wow. There is not a treatment for this, and it's terminal, and she can die in about 2 months." Wow. And so, again, this is a pretty major deal, right? I'm 18. I'm in my first year of college, working at the college bookstore, and I got a $4.25 an hour job, and I'm about to be on my own. So, basically I start, I'm dealing with my mom dying, and she's spending the last couple months of her life, teaching me how to do a checkbook and how to, pay the rent and do lists so I can stay, up with what I have to do and my responsibilities and all these kinds of things. Just kind of like living lessons, for being an adult. So I'm doing that. I'm still dealing with okay, I'm on my own. Now I'm in kind of a survival mode, if you will, right? And I'm thinking, well, shit, I've got to do something here, to survive, And so I start making some phone calls, and I call one of my cousin's husbands, or actually at the time it was her boyfriend, and he had he sold an oil investment over the phone. It was one of those kind of boiler room type operations. And I said, I need a job. I need a job where I can actually make enough to support myself. And he's like, well, come over and we'll train you and get you on the phones and all that kind of stuff. And so here I am, this 18-year-old kid. I've got no experience whatsoever. And they teach me how to be a closer on the phone. And I learn all these lessons and all that kind of stuff, as far as never speak after asking for the deal, and, all these scientific sales kinds of, methodologies and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I do that. I get my first deal right before my mother dies. My mom ends up passing away, but right before she passes away, we have a talk, and it's about racing. And she basically, she's in and out of it. She's now gone down to about 85, 90 pounds, and wow. And she's basically starving to death. And we have her at my grandparents' house to keep her comfortable until she passes. And she's like, "Look, I know you've always wanted to race. I'm not going to be around here much longer to worry about you. Please be careful. Follow your dreams," is basically what it was. And I said, okay. she passes and I still have to support myself. So it takes a number of years before I can actually, invest in myself and make enough money to start putting myself through driving schools. And the first one I wanted to go to was a road racing school. It was very important to me to understand how to just drive a car properly and the physics of driving a car and four corners of weight, all that kind of stuff. And so I enrolled in the Jim Russell Racing School. Drove a Formula Ford and a Formula Mazda, and then I did all these schools. And I was doing go-kart schools, and I was doing Southwest Tour NASCAR, Legends cars, everything I can take, I took a school in. That's how I kind of lived my racing life for a while, and eventually I get married, I buy my own go-kart, I'm road racing my go-kart, and because that's what I can afford to run. And in about 1997, I went to the Frank Hawley Drag Racing School, and I, get my super comp license, and it's the first time I've ever been in a drag car. I've been around it, I've been on the outside of it, blah blah blah, but never actually in one. And so I get into a super comp car, I make my first run, and I'm like, oh my God, these are awesome. Right? Like the sensory experience, they're just the acceleration, I'm in love with it. Right. And I love road racing and I love all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, why was I fighting like the drag racing thing for so long? Because I kind of wanted to drag race, but the road racing was where I thought I was going. And then I get into these drag cars and I'm like, I'm kind of won over, and so I get my super comp license. And that's all I have. I don't have a car to drive. I don't have an opportunity, nothing. And I'm trying to figure out who's going to put me in the car, because nobody really cares who your father is, and put you in a car. You have to prove yourself. They put you in a car because you can help somebody win, not because they thought your dad was cool. That realization came up pretty quick. And I figured out that I needed to be a crew guy, to put myself in that circle, so that I'm around it. And then if an opportunity comes, maybe I'll get it. So I crew, and I'm a terrible crew guy, like, like I can do what you want me to do, but I'm not a gifted mechanic, and so, I do the bottom end on one Nostalgia Top fuel car, and I lasted about a day before I heat stroked out on that, and then but I still got to do this crew guy. I think I just stepped in a little too deep the first time, and so I become a crew guy for this alcohol funny car team, and they run a car in CIFCA, the California Independent Funny Car Association. They run like a 750 index, but with alcohol funny cars. I meet this guy at a barbecue. Right now I'm married and we're having this barbecue, and this guy comes to the barbecue that's a friend of my wife's, and I find out he's putting together a top alcohol car, for going into CIFCA racing. I said, well, if you need somebody, I'd really like to be a part of that team. And so about 6 months goes by, I get this call from him. He's like, hey, we're getting this car together. You're welcome to come in, be a part of the team. I'm like, great. I show up. I work on the car for a couple of days, and something goes on. They had a driver, for the car. And something goes on with the driver to where he's no longer on the team. And I get this phone call from the owner, and he's like, hey, I know you want to drive. You're going to be the driver of this car. It didn't register. I hang the phone up, and I'm talking to my wife at the time, and I was like, I think I might get a chance to drive, and it sounded like I was. And so the phone rings like 2 minutes later. It's this guy, Dave, again, the owner. He's like, hey, Adam, I'm just calling to tell you because I don't think you got it. You're going to be the driver of this car. Get your fire suit, get all your stuff together, and you're going to drive this car. And I was like, oh, shit. Okay, great. So then I got to get my fire suit, for all of this, and my helmet and all that kind of stuff. And I call Simpson, and they set me up with a bunch of stuff. I buy it, and I have to go license in this car. And I've never driven an alcohol funny car before, and it's a pedal clutch, and it's got a 3-speed Lenco transmission in it, and you push buttons on the steering wheel, and they're a fairly difficult car to drive. And I don't know the first thing about these. I know how to drive a super comp car, but not a top alcohol car. So I end up calling the Frank Hawley drag racing school again because they had a class in top alcohol funny car, but I couldn't afford it. So I call them up, and I'm talking to one of the guys that works over there, and I'm like, hey, I got this ride for a top alcohol funny car, and I can't afford your class. Would you be kind enough to send me your manual that you send to your students?
Okay.
And he sends me the manual, and it's got everything, the entire process, the entire procedure for driving one, from the time that you start the motor up, clutch in high gear, all that kind of stuff, do the burnout in high gear, stop, pull the thing back down into low gear, reverser, everything that you have to do. And, I write this down like 100 times, on a piece of paper, because it's the way that I remember things is if I write it down a lot. Anyway, it's time to license, and we bring the car out, and I license in this thing and got it in 3 runs. And the next week we had our first race, and we were number 1 qualifier. We end up, I think our first year I got Rookie of the Year, and then the second year we ended up winning the championship. And so first championship I ever got, it was like the biggest thing ever for me, and I mean, and it's a smaller series, and it's a kind of a regional series, but it was huge for me because we won like 4 out of 8 races, and we did really well and won the championship. And I went on to drive that car for a couple more years, and then went to a 2-car team, and that was Jim Broom's team, and I drove his Sifka car because by that time the guy I was driving for sold the car, and I drove for him, and that was a little bit different motor, a little bit different transmission. We did okay. I got a call about a year later to drive a Nostalgia Top Fuel dragster, and I was good in a pedal clutch car, and a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, I put your name in for this car. Take it, don't take it, whatever. Call the guy, don't call the guy, but he's looking for a driver. So I call him up, and that guy's name is John Blanchard. He owned a Nostalgia Top Fuel car, and it was a pedal clutch car and all that. And he gives me a tryout, and so we go to Bakersfield, and I try this, I get in the car. And I've never been in a nitro car. And this is exactly the same type of car that my dad used to drive, So this is kind of, when I first got into racing, which I should actually mention is that, when I first got into it, it was to experience some of the same things that my dad did in an attempt to kind of get to know who he was. And,
sure.
You kind of, you want to experience those same things to understand the love of it.
Right.
And, so anyway, I'm at this point to drive the same type of car, and the car starts, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like I don't know if I'm ready for this thing. This thing is shaking, and it's popping, it's in my face. I've now gone from probably 1,500 horsepower to 3,500 horsepower.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And when these things blow up, they blow up all over you, and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I enter into what I call an F it mode. Like where you like either this thing is going to kill me, or I'm going to drive this thing.
Yeah.
And so I get in it. I do the burnout, I come back, I do a run. I think I drove it a little bit out of the groove. We came back. I said, that was my problem. I know what I'm doing. I'm overdriving. And came back in. We did it. We made a good run. And I had 2 of the 3 runs I needed to do to get my license in Nostalgia Top Fuel. And then I think about a couple weeks later, we went to Sacramento, and I actually finished my licensing and raced that same night. And that was the beginning of my Nostalgia Top Fuel career, was that. So I've drove for John for, a year and a half, and he was notoriously a guy that didn't have drivers for very long at all. I think I won the record, which was a year and a half, which ain't saying much, but that car had a tendency to sometimes, blow up and go on fire. And so it gave me a lot of experience of being on fire, of a car being blown up, getting oiled in, all these things that happen when you drive these kinds of cars. And when you get oiled in, it's all the oil kind of coming out of the motor and hitting you in the face with it, and it hits your visor, and then you can't see. So now you're going 250, and now you can't see, and so you have to realize that you need to relax your hands off the steering wheel and hit the parachutes and try to get this car stopped without seeing. And so I became an investor in racing tear-offs on my helmet really quickly, like what the sprint car drivers use.
Yeah.
And by that, then if you got oiled in, you can pull one and you were good.
Right.
Anyway, driving this car, I had about a 1 in 2 chance of blowing up every time I drove this thing. It wasn't a really good running car. Occasionally it was, but it blew up a lot, and it gave me a lot of experience. And it was a calculated risk in my career, because I kind of said to myself that, like, if I can stay alive in this thing for a year or more, somebody may give me an opportunity in a better car, a little more consistent car. And I just kind of kept my head down, kept doing it. And, we were going through these things with, the tires going flat at 200 miles an hour, and, the throttle sticking on the burnout. There were a couple things that would happen that were a little uncool, and towards the end of that year, we kind of both knew we were going to go in different directions and stuff, and we did. And right at that time, I got a phone call from a guy named Brian Van Dyke, and Brian Van Dyke ran a top 5 Nostalgia Top Fuel car, and it was a really badass car. It was all black and purple, and it's called the RB Entertainment car, and it was a great car. And it had a really good crew chief, and that was Bob McLennan. And he was working for Brian at the time as a crew chief. And the driver had just left, and I got this call from Brian. And Brian said, "Hey, I talked to 13 guys out here, and all 13 suggested you drive this car." Well, cool, I'm in. He was a funny guy, because the first thing he said to me is like, "Adam," he goes, "you can roll this car 14 times and I'll build you 14 cars."
Wow.
And and he had money, and he liked going racing. He was from the time he was a little kid, he went to the March meet and watched racing, and he was helping sponsor some of the payouts for some of the races and stuff. And anyway, I'm gonna drive for Brian Van Dyke, and Brian says, "I'm gonna fly you up to San Francisco where the car is and get you fitted for the car." So I go up there, and there's Bob McLennan, Tony Bernardini, and these are guys that I really admired from afar, because I watched them race, and they had one of the badass small blocks a few years ago, and now they're doing this Hemi car with Brian. And I've got Sammy Hale, who's like a legend in drag racing. He's fabricating stuff so that I'm fitting in the car properly and putting the brake where I want it and the steering where I want it and throttle and inclination, all that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to drive for some big boys, is the way that I saw it. I was like, these guys are serious. I hope I've got it,
Sure.
up for enough for these guys, that kind of thing. And we go racing with those guys. And so we go to our first race, and we qualified number 2 in the quickest field in history back in 2005. And we start running, and I run Brian's car from 2005 to 2010. And we had some success, no wins yet, I mean, it was, we were going to a lot of finals and like doing really well in points and stuff like that, but we weren't really pulling the trigger on wins yet. And then 2010, Brian decides to build a brand new car, and it's a brand new Nealon Parks car, beautiful car, chute pack body, really killer paint job, and looks like like almost like a modern art painting, the way it was painted. It was painted by Art Himsel, who's like a real famous painter guy. Anyway, getting this car, and first race of the season is the March meet. And, the significance of the March meet has never escaped me. It was my dad's biggest race. It made his career. Every legend in drag racing has won the March meet. All the old style legends have won that. Don Garlits, Prudhomme, my father, there's anybody that has a real name in drag racing has won that race. And we end up making it to the final in 2010. And I'm sitting in the car and I'm belted in, and I'm in the position to duplicate a win that my father got in the same class of car. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking, how great would that be to go to the winner's circle and blah, blah, blah. And I had to mentally slap myself in the face and go, you dumbass. You have to do everything it takes to win this race before you can celebrate the race.
Right.
So it became a thing, right? Where I'm like, okay, I get back to where we're at, because you could very easily lose this race,
Sure.
and so we end up winning the March meet. I raced Howard Haight and in the final, and we ran this great number. I think it was a 5:74 or 76 at the time in the quarter mile, and I win my first March meet, and it was my first Top Fuel win as well. And there was such a feeling of complete cycle, something I always wanted to win that race before I was even racing in it.
Right.
Knowing the importance of it, knowing I was conceived during it, all of these things come into your mind, and then you win it.
Yeah.
That's a big deal for me. And it's still considered in nostalgia ranks that's the race to win. So we win it, and we ended up having a great year and ended up winning the championship. And that was my second championship, but first one in Top Fuel. And that was pretty neat. So then, we go from there, and the next year, 2011, I think we took off. We went to the March meet. We blew about 5 motors up in 5 runs, and we were like, okay, we're going to put this aside for a minute. By that time, Brian decided to sell the car, but Bobby McLennan, the crew chief, decided that he was going to continue on. And he had a car he was building in the background, and it was based on a small block Chevy engine configuration. And he's like, will you drive that? I was like, yeah, and it was this canopy car, and it was like this wild, nobody had come out with a canopy front engine Top Fuel car before. And, and at first I wasn't real sure about it. I'm like, shit, this thing's, I'm going to be inside with the fire when it happens. I mean, I knew some of the history of some of the older canopy cars, and some of them cooked their drivers, pretty good. But anyway, we get in it and we start testing it, and, it's running okay. In 2012, we had tested it a little bit in 2009. And while the Neyland Parks was getting built, but 2012 was like the first year that we were actually going to campaign the car, and we brought it out, and we ended up having a really good year, and I think we won 2 or 3 races, and then we ended up winning the championship with that car as well. And so now we won it with the small block Chevy, and I've been in that car to today. I'm still in that car right now. We're in the
awesome.
Yeah. And so we won a bunch of races with that. And this year we won the March meet again. I now have 2 March meets, and we're leading points in the championship today. I still love driving as much as I ever have. Now I'm 52 years old, and I'm still loving it, and I'm still trying to go farther. I'd love an opportunity to go to, the big show, as they call it, for like the Mellow Yellow series, and drive a Top Fuel car or funny car. But even if I do that, I think I'd still probably drive the nostalgia Top Fuel car. There's no sensory experience like those particular cars. With the motor in front of you where you can't see in front of you, you've got this 12 13-inch tire that's trying to put 3,500 horsepower to the ground. At night when you've got flames that are 8 feet high on either side of you and going down the track, there's nothing like that. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to be a part of a team. It's not all just you being the driver. It's very little of that, actually. It's 90% of it is the preparation and the maintenance on that car between each and every round that makes it run so well.
Yeah.
I just sit in it and hold on and turn it off and get out, and
well, I think it's a little bit more than that, but okay.
A little bit, but it does not escape me the value of the team, and what they're doing, because my life's in their hands basically, and they're the ones that are putting that car together and putting it together perfectly in an hour.
Yeah.
And then going out and running it again, and and then I blow it up and burn it up, and they pull the motor out, they put a new one in, and we go out again. And so I feel pretty fortunate to be a part of that, but it's also part of the love is the camaraderie and the team part of it.
Yeah. I want to talk to you quickly about that phone call that you got, that first phone call. Mm-hmm. Had you competed formally?
On the first phone call for the alcohol funny car?
Yes.
No. I had just done Super Comp. In go-karts I had, but all I had was a license. I had only gone down the track, and done it without crashing the car, which basically they'll give you a license for, if you do it safely and effectively and stuff. And so my only competition at that point had been in go-kart racing, road racing, where you were racing, 15, 16 guys, on this little track and, fighting for position the whole time and that kind of stuff. And so as far as being savvy in the drag racing world, not really, I had a lot of access to, a lot of like old legendary drivers where I picked their brains a lot. I talked to guys and where you looking when you're going down the track, like what's the most important thing to bring to a team, and some of that was like recordability, like in your head. Like what did the car do at the launch? What did it do at 300 feet? Is it shaking? Is it not? Is it still pulling at half track? Is it falling off? All those kinds of things. You need to, when you're done with the run, you need to be able to like kind of rewind your head a little bit and go back to the run and really self-critique the run as well as yourself and your driving. Mm-hmm. And so that was the one thing I got from some of these drivers that I would talk to before ever getting into the race car. And I had access to people like Pat Foster, who, really famous funny car driver, fabricator, and he became kind of a mentor of mine. And he was a friend of my dad's, and he'd want me to call him after races and stuff, and I'd download kind of like what I was feeling, what I was doing. And he was an ear. Mm-hmm. And he was I can't underestimate the importance of his part in my life, as far as my racing life was concerned, because he really gave me things to think about.
Sure.
And so the way that you conduct yourself on a race team and what you do to, I don't know, for lack of a word, endear yourself to the team and for them to really get everything they can from you is some of these things that this guy would tell me. And it was like, don't be a dick on the team, like, don't, simple stuff like that, but like appreciate like what these guys are doing for you, and making sure that you're safe and those kinds of things, that appreciation for the team, the, giving them as much information as I can, before we're looking at computers and data and all that kind of stuff to make sure that I'm processing correctly.
Sure.
The fact that like I give them everything I've got on the starting line, because, in drag racing, it's your reaction time and your driving ability that is really what will make you stand apart from other people. And so I never wanted to get left on, and so I worked on it. And so reaction times are huge for me, and they don't come by mistake. They come from really understanding how your body works and how you optimize your controls and all of those kinds of things. And you have to be cognizant of, the foot speed, and, the faster you open the blades on the injector, the faster the motor revs, the faster the clutch comes in, and the faster the car goes forward, you know? And so if you see the light, but your foot speed's not there, you can be off a couple hundredths, and that could be the difference between winning and losing. And so I'm really cognizant of that part of it, and that's the one real thing that I really try to give whoever I drive for, is that they are going to get the best lever that there's going to be, and so I work on that a lot, and you just try to give them everything you can be, and and that's both on the track and off the track, so the PR side, and like just being nice to people, and and fans and stuff like that are coming out to watch you and that kind of thing. So you try to give them everything you've got.
When you won the March event, was it kind of like closure to you?
The significance of that race and him winning it never left me, and the fact that I was able to put myself into a position to where we won it as well became a thing where, it was kind of a closure thing, but it was also the start of something too, because for the longest time I was kind of doing some of the racing because he was a racer, and doing things, to experience some of the same things that he was experiencing. And then there was this point, and it was probably right around the March meet, where you start to go, you know what? I love this too for myself, and now I'm going to do it for me.
Sure.
And so I was never really open about the fact of like what I was doing, why I was racing or anything like that, because I was really hanky about ever using my dad's name in my own racing career. Even from the start, I didn't really like to use my dad's name a lot. I felt like I wanted my own driving career to stand on its own.
Sure.
I didn't want to be known as Mike Sorokin's son for the rest of my life. Like, I wanted to be Adam Sorokin that wins races and wins championships, and that was important to me, and that became even more important to me. In a sense, I think a lot of fathers and sons compete with each other,
of course,
and I feel like that's probably evident with me as well, because I feel like now I kind of compete with him, even though he's not here, but in the racing world,
Sure.
And so you want to stand on your own. You want to have your own career, and it's not always about Mike Sorokin, although, very proud of his accomplishments and what he's done, and, that forever, I hope I'm half as good as he ever was. But I definitely, you just kind of want to, at that point, that March meet point was where I actually kind of said, you know what, I'm going to do this for myself.
Have you raced at Orange County, the place where he passed?
No. Orange County closed before I got old enough to really race there. That was the track I would go to a bunch. So it was strange, now that I look back at it, it was like my mom was taking me back to the track that my dad was even killed on, and that was weird,
Right.
And
I'm trying to bring that full circle, because there's so much that kind of goes around, and it kind of comes back to the same place. So
so when my dad was racing, my mom was one of the drag racing wives that went to the races. Like, she helped pack his parachutes, and she went to almost every single race that he went to from the time they met. And my mom was really important to my dad for her to be there, and so she was one of the drag racing wives. So she was friends with Carolyn Safford and Lynn Prudhomme, and Don Prudhomme's and Kenny Safford's wives, and they were very close. And so she was like in that element, that was really her life for quite a while until he was killed. And so after my dad was killed, she just felt it was really important for me to see what he did, and to meet the people that knew him, and to get to know him in that sense, with also probably hoping that I didn't get too enamored by doing this stuff. But I remember being a little kid and having her, stuff caught in my ears, and go to the stands or go to Orange County's tower and watch the racing. And like, that's what your dad used to do,
Right.
And and she would just say, he was great. Like there was nobody that could leave on him, and that, and that might have been an early like seed that she unknowingly planted in me that became really important to me. Like if he leaves, I'm going to leave. Well, but I'm going to work on it because nobody got to teach me how to leave. I had to work on that yourself. Your dad's not there to help mentor you.
Sure. Yeah. It almost seems like it wasn't, I think she almost intentionally was placing that seed.
I think so. I think kind of in the back of her mind, she kind of knew that I really wanted to do that, but, being a mom, I mean, she's protective, I mean, I still remember the first time she let me go surfing by myself by taking the bus down to the beach and I didn't know this at the time, but like she followed the bus down in her car and I was surfing out there and didn't know it, but she was like hiding behind like the lifeguard towers and watching me and and probably like crawling on the ground so I didn't see her just to make sure I was all right, and so I was her only son and it was just her and I growing up, and so we had kind of a relationship that was different than most parents and kids, because it was just kind of me and my mom, and she was only 18 years older than me, and we talked about everything. It was the 70s and 80s, I mean, there was wild stuff going on.
Sure.
And the men in her life, they were always kind of dangerous individuals. There was a rodeo guy, and then there was a jewelry thief guy, and and there. Undercover cops and mafia people. Yeah, I mean, there was like she really had some eclectic taste in men. So anyway, my boy and I had a talk when he was a little kid, and he was aware that my father died racing, and he knew I was racing, and he was like, I don't want you to race because I don't want you to die. I was kind of taken back by it because I didn't realize that he made the correlation, because he was only like 4 years old, I think, when he said that. I said, well, the reason I race is because I love to race. And if I didn't race or do something I loved, I wouldn't be showing you what I want you to do in your life, which is I want you to follow things and follow passions, and I want you to do what you love. And I go, it's a lot safer now than it was when my dad was killed. Yeah. The same thing can happen to me today, and I would walk away from it, and, they didn't have the bell housings. They didn't have the safety features that these cars have today.
Sure.
So they're still pretty barbaric. They can still hurt you. They're still trying to kill you, that kind of thing. But
the entire world is trying to kill you. That's
even more so today.
Sure.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. But no, I mean, nothing's completely safe, and you can die crossing the street.
Of course.
You could die walking down your steps. I mean, there's all those kinds of things, and I don't think you live life in perpetual worry of death, because it's right around the corner anyway. So
of course,
you might as well go doing stuff that you like and are happy.
My father is, thank God, alive and very healthy, and he's so incredibly important to me. And I don't know where I would be without my father. Mm-hmm. And to see that, you can achieve what you have achieved just because your father was he just sounds like such an amazing guy. And even though he wasn't there for you physically, he was able to give you what you needed mentally to succeed and to get to where you are.
Yeah, it definitely gave me the drive, something to aspire towards, I mean, aside from, my mom telling me how good of a driver he was, it was just important to her to tell me how good of a person he was and how loved he was generally by everybody. And when I was growing up, I was like, well, somebody tell me a story when he was an asshole, or, tell me a story, like, give me a real story. No, everybody loved him. Yeah. And that was just as important too, because then that kind of gives you something to shoot for in your own life, and like how you conduct yourself, you know, and that you should conduct yourself with some class and some tact and, and some love for human beings and stuff like that. And so that's important, and
it's hugely important.
So you try to live up to it, Mm-hmm. And when your dad is kind of bigger than life and, you know, kind of this legendary figure, there's also a responsibility that you feel as the child of somebody like that, of not upsetting that, you know, that kind of status, you know?
Right. The balance. You're kind of upsetting the balance.
You kind of respect the memory.
Yeah.
And so you really try to, you know, conduct yourself in that way. And I think that's really important too. You know, it's something I try to convey to my son too. It's like, hey, you know, it's like we come from a family where your grandfather is very famous, you know, and, you know, and it's like, conduct yourself, and you know, all you have in this world is, you know, your last name and your word, you know, and that's really important.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to post all these stats, all these victories, all this future Hall of Fame stuff. But what I'd like you to do, if you'd like people to, you know, look you up, or if you'd like people to kind of find you online, please take this opportunity to let people know, because it's worth it. I mean, I'm looking at all this stuff, and the story is just, I'm hypnotized, really. So please, go ahead.
I'm on Facebook, you know. I don't really have an Adam Sorokin, you know, website or anything like that. I don't get into that too much. I'm basically kind of got a Facebook profile under my name, and if somebody's a fan and they like drag racing, or they like the story or whatever, I just kind of invite them to just be a buddy, you know. I mean, like we're all kind of fans. We all like drag racing. That's what we have kind of in common. And you know, friend me, you know, it's all good. You know, I'm on Instagram too, and you know, I'm making some efforts right now to go to the big show, and I've got a couple things in the works that we're working on. Hopefully it'll happen. You know, all it takes is lots of dollars, but I'm working on that, and I'd like to do it at high level. And before I'm done, I'm still going to drive for several more years. So I'm not done yet. I'm still feeling like I like to do it. I'll keep doing it till it's not fun anymore.
I'd like an invitation to the Hall of Fame ceremony, please. So you know my number, you know my email.
Absolutely. I've still got my head down. I'm still trying to lay the body of work down, so to speak, and you know, hopefully it'll be worthy one of these days. But right now it's just try to win the next round, you know, and if it happens, it happens, you know.
Adam, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming out.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Cheers. Stay safe, please.
I will try.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded and edited by me, Michael Senderovich. If you like the show, please leave me a review wherever you listen. It helps the show greatly. And finally, please follow me on Instagram at Road Stories Mike. Thanks so much for listening.